We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
What I'm going to do is some very quick introductions. I have two warm-up questions for the panel, but I certainly hope that there are questions out there in the audience. So as I'm doing introductions and my warm-ups, why don't people jot down their questions, and when I'm done with that, I'll turn to the audience. We have, what is our time? We've got an hour and 15 minutes, I believe. So I'll try to wrangle this group appropriately to get through that. So introductions down on the end. First, we have Dr. Michael Hurst. Dr. Hurst is director of the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Program Management Office. In that role, he's focused on project management, project operations, more cost-effective, implementing Agile and Scrum, and managing the project work streams for the IT strategy. Dr. Hurst graduated from MIT and Boston University, is a licensed clinical and industrial psychologist, a certified Scrum Master, a former professor at Boston University, where he was for 25 years. He was also an entrepreneur. He's founded 5 different companies, and one of them was acquired as part of an IPO. Welcome. Thank you. Next to him, we have Chad Wright. Chad is the Director of Management Information Services at Athena Health. He's over 20 years experience specializing in Agile project management, business systems analysis, and IT strategy development. Chad was previously at Endeca Technologies and also at Abbott Technologies. He has a degree in mathematics from the College of the Holy Cross, a master's degree in computer information sciences at Bentley, and an MBA from the University of Massachusetts. Welcome, Chad. Thank you for being here. Next to Chad, we have Paula Carroll. Paula is TriZetto's Vice President of Quality Operations and Services, is responsible for the T3, their product and technology organization for the Agile transformation, quality process, test automation, solutions and performance testing, Agile project management, development operations, and global testing. Get a lot of roles. Previous to this, she was at Deltek, which is a provider of enterprise software and information solutions for professional services firms and government contractors. And before that, Fiserv is a provider of information management and electronic commerce systems, financial services, and insurance. She holds multiple professional certifications from the Society for Quality and the Edwards Deming Institute. Is also certified in many rough and agile methodologies. She did her degree in Bucharest, has completed coursework in IT and business management at Regis University. Welcome, Paula. Thank you. And then finally, we have Matt Kaplan. Matt is president of products at LogMeIn, where he's responsible for worldwide product development, management, and marketing of LogMeIn's collaboration products, including Join.me and Cubby. He's a startup veteran. Previously was at Cambridge Technology Partners, Agency.com, Permission TV, Pearson's, and KnowledgeVision. He did his BS degree in mathematics at computer science from MIT. All right, welcome, panelists. So I wanted to kind of start, I'm going to sit down here, with just kind of a quick level setting for the audience here so they can understand your situations. A couple of basic questions. So the size of your organization, business-wise, from an IT point of view, how, if you're doing any in-source or outsource development and offshore development, if you're just generally vertically aligned or horizontally aligned from a structural point of view, and if you're dealing primarily with internal clients or if you're dealing with external customers as well. So any volunteers? Anyone want to start first? Just a couple minute or two on this level setting. Start down at the end.
Sure, I'll start. I'm with Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, which a lot of you may know as perhaps your own health insurance plan. So we have overall 1,200 Harvard Pilgrim employees, but our IT organization is only about 90. We are fully outsourced to what was Pro and now Dell Services, and they supply us with about 800 staff, of whom around 500 are in the IT development side of the organization. And we have just spent 5 years and about $100 million completely redoing our entire infrastructure at the same time as delivering services to our customers. And quite literally, at the beginning, when I was asked to do this beginning in 2008, they had just won the Best Health Plan in America award for 3 years running. And I am pleased to say that in spite of this entire revolution of our infrastructure, we've maintained that for the last 5 years as well. So that's where we've been, a huge, huge endeavor. We have 94 applications in 14 functional areas, 47 to 50 Scrum teams running at any time, and they spanning all those functional areas. And we use Scrum on the team level, and then as we move into the production environment with up to 300 or more components and features going into production every month, we use a Kanban process. So we use both of those as we do our thing.
Excellent, thank you. Chad?
Chad Wright with Athena Health. Similar to Michael, also on the corporate IT side, supporting internal business applications. So we're using Scrum and Kanban as well, primarily with commercial off-the-shelf and other cloud applications that we use to support the business. So my stakeholders, or I should say my product owners, are not traditional product management folks. We're not dealing with external clients, again, because our internal clients are employees. Our product owners are typically CFOs, directors of finance, managers of sales operations, directors of HR, and so we provide that product owner function, if you will, as a part of what we do. So following Scrum, using Kanban, our organization is about 30 people. We have 6 Scrum teams across that group, part of a larger IT organization that's only about 80 people or so. 2,500 employees, primarily in the U.S. because we sell electronic health records and business automation solutions to medical practice in just the U.S. So our audience is a little bit smaller in that regard. Biggest challenges that we have is that the organization is growing at about 30% per year, and about a third of our employees change their job every year. So a lot of knowledge management challenges across the organization, and using Scrum and Kanban as a way to try to organize that growth with the types of things that we do for our stakeholders.
Thanks, Chad. Paula?
Carroll with Trizetto Corporations. Trizetto provides healthcare integrated solutions. Some of our biggest customers are Blue Cross, Blue Shields, Aetna, and of course a lot of others. The technology group is about 1,000 people, and we also have an offshore office in Belarus, Minsk. The Agile adoption started about 8-9 months ago, so about June timeframe, 2012. And we have right now about 65, actually a little more than 65 Scrum teams. So a big organization. We did bring a lot of training in-house with Raleigh and a few other companies that provided Agile coaches and Agile training.
Thanks, Paul. Huh?
So I'm Matt Kaplan. I run the product team for LogMeIn's collaboration products, which includes Join Me. Anyone here use Join Me as a screen sharing or online meeting tool? All right, excellent. And Cubby, which is a cloud storage product. We are a company of about 550 people, a SaaS software as a service company, about 250 engineers, all in Budapest, Hungary. So our challenge really is in Agile adoption is how do you bridge sort of the gap between culture and the geography gap. I have been involved since about a year now and have brought some lean and Agile practices both to the company.
Excellent, thank you. So I think that gives everyone kind of a general sense of where our panel is in terms of technical situations and organizational situations. I want to do one more question to get us going. I'm curious on why Agile. Why did your organizations choose to adopt Agile? And I'm not sure how you particularly fit into the history of your organization's Agile adoptions, but as much as you can speak to, what was the impetus? Why was Agile chosen as a methodology? What were the original goals for adopting it? What did you hope to achieve? And how'd that work out? What actually happened? And then today, what are the goals? Like, how has that shifted? What do you see as the benefits, or what does the organization feel it's getting from Agile as a software methodology? Any volunteers? Which should I pick?
Or I can go again.
All right.
Well, I'll just quickly say, in 2007, we had the good fortune of having our senior vice presidents of the business side and the VPs of the functional areas get together with our CIO, CTO, deputy CTO at the time, and the chief architects from, at that time, Pro Services. We had a dead software platform called Amasys. It was dead many years, and it was running on a dead hardware platform, HP 3000. So it was clear that we needed to completely replace our infrastructure for health plan administration. So that group spent a year thinking about what needed to be done, and a couple of things that they realized were that the waterfall method, which had worked so well for Perot and for Harvard Pilgrim for the preceding 8 years, had actually some issues that they weren't going to deal with. One is they didn't want to get to the end of 5 years and $100 million not having built what the highest priority things were of the highest quality for all of our internal customers and, of course, our eventual outside external customers such as yourself. So one of the biggest things was to make sure that this huge investment in time and money was going to result in the most important things being done in a time that would keep the business running. Last thing we needed was to get at the end and not be able to run the business. So that was a big 5-year plan, which is normally not considered a very agile style plan, but that's what the corporate strategic planning was. And all of a sudden, our budget, our whole capital budget was 90% this IT strategy. Implementing all of the things that the business people said were the most important things to do. So we wanted to develop a much more intense collaboration with the business people, which had been absent. We typically had gotten to a point and deliver something, and as someone, I think you remarked earlier, you get to the end, and they say, oh, that's not what we meant. That's not exactly how we needed to work, and blah, blah, blah. So they wanted to avoid that. The other thing is, as you all must be aware, is that healthcare is a really dynamically changing field. So another thing they wanted to avoid was being locked into a plan-driven approach that wasn't going to be very adaptable. And they wanted to make sure that there were constant reviews of what was being done, at least on a monthly level, corporately, as to the priority of what needed to be delivered and when and what needed to change. And so being able to adapt and stay in tune with the marketplace was really prescient, because look at what happened, right, in the last 5 or 6 years. And that's been stunning, and it's been a huge help for us to be able to do that. The comeuppance of it all, if you will, is that we ended up creating, and someone mentioned dependency management here, with the help of Rally, a way of keeping track. With all those teams, we had 1,200 inter-team dependencies that we had to manage, all towards some point in time where we started migrating customers from one infrastructure to another infrastructure. And we did this with what we call a Christmas tree, and I won't talk about that anymore, but it's a very interesting way of being able to track dependencies and be able to watch that Christmas tree all go up towards the node, which is go live pilot migration, which is what we did. And then came production. And we tracked all of those things to the point where we started moving accounts and members from one old platform to the new platform. And we're still continuing it and should be finishing that part this year. So it's actually enabled us to do that in a very progressive, iterative way, which according to our Senior Vice President of Sales and Customer Service yesterday, who's been through 6 of these types of migrations at different health plans, it's the smoothest and least difficult one he's ever had. That we've had a lot of great feedback. Customers don't even know that it's happened, even though they're told. The accounts are told so that they know. But so it's been going well.
Thanks, Michael. Should we just go down the line?
Sure. I've had the opportunity to implement Scrum in 2 companies. Both situations were a little bit different. The first one was more of a startup organization as well as a startup IT organization. The second was with Athena-Health, a little more mature organization, but high growth as well. And in both cases, the reason why we pushed for Scrum from an IT perspective was really around visibility, was being able to provide our stakeholders across the organization full visibility into what we were doing at any point in time. And so all of our sprint planning, all of our release planning and roadmaps are all completely visible and public to anyone in the organization. And that really feeds into the culture as well at Athena-Health around full openness to information. And the other byproduct of that, which I hadn't really heard mentioned yet today, was really around the employee morale of the IT, the developers, the business analysts, the project managers, And working in an agile environment where there's a lot of visibility in what we're doing, everybody knows their role. They know what's expected of them. They know when it's expected of them. And so I don't ever have the need to have conversations with people within our team about, well, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my role and what's being expected of me? And so we can take our release planning and our sprint planning and it rolls right up into our corporate scorecard, our corporate metrics. So people really have a good understanding of what they do. And we found that Scrum allows us to do that both from a visibility and then from a job satisfaction perspective as well.
I have implemented Agile in different companies at the enterprise level, and some of the common theme I have seen, especially early, I actually had the experience with Agile before it was even called Scrum, like in 2010, when it was called just Agile Software Development Methodology. So eliminating the silos between functional departments, that was one reason that I worked with at PeopleSoft and Fiserv and VeriSign. At Trizetto, as Dr. Hurst mentioned, with the emphasis on the healthcare reform, our clients needed to deliver, needed for us to deliver the functionality faster. And also they needed to be more involved at the functionality level, the business level, to understand what we are delivering, what kind of compliance functionality we are delivering, since they have all been doing things a little different. So that faster delivery prompted our CTO actually to introduce the Agile methodology. We are doing Scrum at Trizetto, and also for other areas like customer support, we are, in the architecture group, we are implementing Kanban.
So I've been involved in about, I think, 3 or 4 different Agile implementations. And so when I got to log me in about a year ago, the company had started the Agile transition, but unlike other places I've been to, it wasn't a developer or an engineering-led initiative. It was actually an initiative led by the product team to try to improve the visibility into and deliverability of products. Things were taking a long time to develop. We had months worth of engineering efforts going into big releases, so big batch versus small batch. And the idea was to try to improve our deliverability. And in fact, the CEO of the company was sort of skeptical of that. He thought, how can you just iterate yourself toward a vision? And the thing that we had to sort of win him over was that Agile wasn't a replacement for sort of vision. Right? You still need to know where you're going. You still need to have a release plan. But Agile helped get us there. And I think within the first sort of year or so, things have been results have been mixed. Part because the engineering team was sort of pulled into it, kicking and screaming, if you will. And I just did a recent survey of the team, said if you had to go back and do things the old way, would you do it? And I think 70% of them said yes. So it's in other cases where it's been successful, people would never ever go back to the way it was the other, before you implemented Agile to more waterfall process. So we still have some work to do in that process.
Excellent, thank you. So why don't I just see if there's any questions from the audience. I've got lots of them, so I can keep going.
Can we comment at all on each other's?
Sure. Let me just check. Was there?
How about Steve? We missed what you were going to talk about. Steve has been missed in this.
That is true.
Well, a lot of it was stuff that I kind of included in my presentation, right? So Synacor, about 320 employees, most of them in 100 in engineering, and then a large group of them in operations, business software as a service. And the reason they went Agile originally, like I said, the CEO thought it was going to increase productivity. The reason why I'm doing it is because I realize that it's going to increase our ability to adapt. And there's a lot that's going on in terms of priorities that are constantly changing for us. And for sea change, the big focus there was to improve quality, which is why we went after that.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Lois Wortley, and I work for a little company called Oracle. We're a little bit late in some divisions coming to this Agile approach, and we still kind of have one foot in the old world of waterfall and one foot in Agile. We're trying to get more over to Agile. So my question here is about QA specifically. We have QA team members in our Scrum teams, and they are testing within the sprint. They're writing automation within the sprints, and that's going really well. But occasionally we get to what we call a milestone acceptance test or a system test, where a big provisioned environment is spun up, and then QA needs to go in and run all the automation, do some more ad hoc testing, and do a very focused QA activity. And my question is whether any of you have experience with that, and whether you keep a separate pool of QA resources to do those types of things independent of your Scrum teams, or if the Scrum team kind of all stalls a little bit and works through that with them, or how you manage those types of QA-centric activities.
Okay, so QA on Agile team. Paula?
I can take that. Different organizations do different things when it comes to how you solve this situation, and I think it's very important to understand first the product and the solutions that the company is developing, and then what is the culture of the organization. So at TriZetto, the way we are handling this right now, we have a release cadence of 2 months, so 4 sprints. And the last sprint is called the hardening sprint. I'm not going to comment on the terminology. It's kind of something everybody understands at TriZetto. So during that time, the QAs, they are participating with the regression testing or the system testing in performance testing and also regression testing. So part of the regression testing, we have solution testing. Again, keep in mind, TriZetto develops solutions for our clients, so we have a lot of products that are being integrated. We have Core, we have Care, we have Connect, and each one of these product groups, they have multiple products that are part of that solution. So it's very complex, and at this time we have the work done during the hardening sprint. So the question is, what are developers doing during that time? They, some of them, based on where they are in the Agile adoption, also how they solve the technical debt, they will participate in this type of testing. Some of them will actually fix the issues, and some of them could start working on technical debt or refactoring for the next release. We also have right now on our backlog, one of the goals is actually to start doing solution testing and performance testing earlier in the release life cycle. So after the second sprint, for example, we're going to have performance testing run some of the tests based on the code changes that have been introduced during the first 2 sprints. The same thing with solution testing. So starting that concept of test early and test often, so we make sure that in the hardening sprint, we test the delta and also do some kind of testing at the end based on risk-based testing. So what changes have occurred into that product. So that's how we are handling right now. And there are a few other ways in which I have done in the past. If you'd like at the end, I can talk to you about those.
Anyone else want to comment on testing?
I'll say that's been, testing and QA has been one of our single largest challenges in going Agile. We, in the beginning, had no environment in which we could test all of our functionality, period. We simply could not afford to duplicate our production environment. Way too big, way too complicated. So over time, and we were trying to be very agile in the beginning in particular too, so all teams could release on their own release schedules. And we managed to do it, but boy, you can imagine what the confusion was in the number of projected releases and functions and everything else that happened. So we've evolved this process now where teams have their QA members, And they do all sorts of testing at the functional level within the team. And they're in what's called the project environment. And then we've now created a new environment called the Development Integrated Environment, which is a team and all of its touch point teams who test together. So everything that you touch now has to also test and pass all the tests. And after they pass that stage, and that's run by the QA people on the teams, and then you go into the SIT environment, as we call it, the Systems Integrated Test Environment, which has been specially constructed to have all the necessary applications and setups of the environment to allow you to do end-to-end testing from one beginning point to another end point, but not necessarily everything out to the sides. So we can test 15 primary functional end-to-end scenarios, as we say. And if that all passes, then they can go into the production environment. That whole methodology and changing from a release when you're ready to a scheduled monthly release has changed our dynamics of the error rate tremendously. In our last release, we had 257 components and features going into production, and only one had to be pulled for quality reasons. That was like a dramatic improvement over the last 9 months since we've been slowly moving into this process. Very, very hard work to do this. It requires a lot of discipline that people don't think of Agile teams having to have, but they need to do it.
Can I ask just one clarification on that? When you move from the dev environment to that integration environment, is it the same Scrum team that comes along, or is it a different independent team?
It's the same team who's doing their testing according to their acceptance criteria, test cases, test data, and so forth. There are 2 other teams that actually are, there's 3 other teams that are actually involved in more of a supervisory capacity, if you will. There's a test data management team who runs on a Kanban process, so that every time you're getting prepared to do something in that environment, they ensure that all the proper test data has been accumulated and reset for your use. There's an environments team who's made sure that all the necessary elements within the environment are all set for you to be able to do that. And there's the release management team itself, which is actually managing the portfolio, and that this piece and that piece are going to appropriately connect together in the business process that you're trying to manage. Okay? Did that answer you?
Yes, thank you.
Actually, at Trizeto, we do have a specialized team that runs the performance testing and the solution or end-to-end testing. And the reason is skill set. To execute performance testing requires a different skill set than what QAs will have in a Scrum team at the functional level or at the product level.
Just one more thing on that. I think oftentimes automated testing is the last thing people focus on. They do the daily stand-ups, they do the sprints, they do the planning, they do everything, right? And they say, well, we'll get to automated testing later. If your goal is to release code every 2 weeks if you're in the Scrum, or continuously, right? Because now there's continuous deployment options. Then you should be trying to eliminate testing, eliminate human testing in the process. So I think you need to have a really good, clear understanding of what your ultimate goal is versus how do we implement. Given today where we are, yes, we need to have maybe a regression team, but over time that regression team should go to 0. That's my goal.
That's a really good point, Matt. Because we also had to devise a way of doing this so that every team now that's ready to do their release end-to-end testing has to deliver with it their scripts for the automated testing environment to take place. So they no longer can just dump off the code and bring in the other people to do the rest of the testing. They actually have to deliver the scripts with them.
Let me sneak in a question here. So I've heard requires a lot more discipline. I've heard skill sets. I've heard some practices. What is the biggest kind of training and sort of challenge that you've had as an organization in terms of a capability that you've had to mature significantly while going Agile, and how do you handle that? How do you actually get the skill sets developed?
I'll start with that. Another thing that actually I would like to mention before I answer your question is when it comes to testing, everybody says QA. And I think a lot of you in the room can identify with the fact that when the client sends us a severity 1 issue, the first question is, why wasn't this tested? I would like to take this a little further and talk a little bit about prevention. To answer your question, Bruce, one challenging skill set that we are implementing, and throughout my career I've had the experience to work with, is test-driven development and bringing that prevention into the software development lifecycle, agile or not. So teaching developers how to do test-driven development, that's a skill set that is very difficult to acquire, and not necessarily from the skill set perspective, but from the attitude perspective. I live with one developer, in my house actually two, and they tell me, we don't want to test, we are here to code, we are not here to test. But test-driven development actually introduces that preventative aspect into the code, and assuring that the code meets the user story and the acceptance criteria, and of course eliminates quite a few defects that the QAs later on they don't have to find and also fix.
Anyone else?
In terms of skill set, right, and training, what we found was really focusing on the Scrum Master, right? So the person that's really at the center of the team, that's coordinating the resources, that's coordinating the work, that's working with the product owners to prioritize, to scrub the backlog. That was something that walking into an organization and taking a look at what did that backlog look like, and finding out that it was on spreadsheets and in notebooks and on SharePoint lists, and pulling all that together and finding that it was 10 times larger than anybody thought it would have been. And having people in the Scrum Master role, and that's really the role that we've invested in terms of training, getting all of our project managers, Scrum Masters certified, so that they really understand the terminology, they understand how to do work, and that really transcends itself throughout the teams. And so we found, again, testing is not as big of an issue in our role because we're working with commercial off-the-shelf software. We're not generating products, so QA is not a dedicated role. It's more of a responsibility within our business analysts. So we focus primarily on that Scrum Master role, ensuring that we have the team well educated to move forward with these initiatives.
I think the product owner role is probably the most critical one in our organization, being a kind of driven organization. We need to educate them on not just the kind of the rituals of Agile and Scrum, but also how do you manage the softer skills? How do you manage all the stakeholders, right? You have executives who are saying, hey, we've got to get this done. You have salespeople pulling at you. You've got marketing. You've got all these different key stakeholders. How do you do that and then prioritize the backlog? And the backlog just seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And I said this the other day. I said, it's sort of like the big backlog is sort of like you're writing your bucket list down on a piece of paper and everything you want to accomplish in your life, and then reviewing that every week and say, wow, geez, I'm never going to get this done, right? That just keeps growing and growing. All the things you want to accomplish kind of makes you, right? So I think how do you manage that list, that backlog of things that you can actually accomplish in your lifetime as a product owner, right? And then how do you manage all the other stakeholders around you? We don't have a sort of a tried and true method of educating the product managers. We kind of, we throw them into it, but we give them the support that's needed through. I think coaching is probably a really good way to handle that.
I would agree with that too, the coaching part, because in the beginning we thought we could just train 17 key product owners and Scrum Masters, let them go on 6 different teams, and everything would be hunky-dory. Didn't happen. In fact, we ended up having to. We trained in the first year almost 600 people in Agile. Generally speaking, it was a huge cultural change. We were going from 2 companies at the time, Carroll and Harvard Pilgrim, with a very strong waterfall-driven, high-quality approach. Both companies did everything 150%. The whole notion of doing things just enough, everyone turned white. I mean, that was not the words that you wanted to use in a high-quality organization. Just enough. So it was extremely hard to make the cultural change. We're still doing it today because with staff turnover in both companies, we're constantly training. We have to do about 500 person trainings per year still. We have a full Agile curriculum. We have a product owner curriculum, even though they're the hardest to get to do it. and to continue staying up with it, because in our case, they tend to be functional managers, area managers, or directors of functional areas, with only some of them being from the, well now probably more than slightly over half, IT operational managers who take the role. So it's very challenging to make the whole cultural shift. You would not believe. We had to change rooms, conference rooms into bullpens for teams. We had to change the accounting system because our outsourcer billed by the hour and by the task order and by the service request, and the whole system keyed that on what was your defined role and allowed activities to bill us for. And all of a sudden you have a team where there's no defined role. You're a team member. You write stories. You do testing. You do all sorts of things as part of a team. So that whole system had to change. We had many things that had to change. It was incredible. So the training was culture-wide, and then the skill part of it has been a continuing, ongoing challenge that we're continually revising and trying to improve. Very, very challenging.
Steve, I don't know if you had any comments.
No, I mean, definitely the hardest thing was product owners writing good user stories. And what I found is coaching is the way to go with that. You know, you can train them till they're blue in the face, but having someone sit with them and actually see what they're doing and writing and giving them feedback on it is the best way to handle that.
Thank you. Questions? I think we have one back here. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a cultural question for Mike. In terms of, so you guys switched from a legacy platform to a new platform, how did you handle the balance between the desire to continue developing the short-term desire to fix things on the legacy platform versus those features will be coming out in 2 years to your
And that's quite a balance to have as well. So that was literally measured by the CIO and by our director of application implementations in terms of what was really needed at this moment for the business to continue. So feature requests on the legacy platform, by and large, were deprioritized unless they're needed immediately by a customer, external customer, particularly through the sales department, we know that. So there was a continual review. We have 300 and some projects in queue at all times being evaluated. We have over 100 projects, enterprise level projects in this whole process every single month. So this is a very large endeavor, and it's a very big challenge doing that prioritization as well. You have to constantly review. You can't just say one and done. An old goal that we used to have, one and done, doesn't happen.
Any other questions?
I had a question specifically based on Steve's presentation. We tend to view at Nokia Scrum as a development methodology. You alluded to other methodologies such as program management and even management organization that you do Scrum organization around. And I was interested in how you implement that and kind of what your success is.
Sorry, that was scripted, Ed. That's Steve here.
I can clarify.
Nice try.
Program we manage programs through Scrums. So what was in the past what you would call a program, we create that as a Scrum team and run that as a Scrum, and it'll have dependencies on other Scrum teams in terms of contributions to it. In some cases, it might not be a Scrum team, right? In some cases, it might just be one person from operations or one person from the sales organization or whatever it is in terms of related to how that program is. But we really try to run anything related to any of our product deliveries as Scrum teams.
I actually wanted to ask a question based on the previous discussion. We talk a lot about culture and shift in culture and how it's a different sort of style of organization. I'm curious who you've lost, like inside your organization, as you've made these switches and as culture has changed, as the requirements for, Steve, I think you mentioned in your presentation, this sort of shift of command and control to a self-managed team. Have you lost people? Have people decided that they do not want this new culture, they do not want this new way of working? And how have you handled that? Has it been a reactive thing? Has it been a proactive thing? And what are some strategies for moving?
So I've lost directors, managers, architects, engineers, right? People who just didn't believe that they had the role that they were looking for in terms of the Agile Scrum process, and all decided that, you know, this isn't for me, I'm going to move on. And in one case, only one case that I've had to experience where it's been a proactive one, where the person just was passive aggressive in terms of their activities related to Scrum and wasn't doing anything about it themselves, so we ended up having to take action. But, you know, it isn't for everybody. If people don't have the mental fit with it or the alignment in terms of the way we're going with it, then, you know, there's other companies that are still out there doing wonderful development and co-work.
We lost folks, as did Dell, but we actually had to go through a very active process at one point. So we have the business process outsourcing as well. That's, if you will, the maintenance and the continue making operations work side, and then we have the development project side. And that was new for them to all of a sudden be doing really new development. And it's not the same people who are most comfortable doing maintenance, ongoing operational technical work versus those who are in, if you will, quote unquote, the more creative development work where you're doing brand new things, new features, never seen them before, never touched it before, never ran something this way before. So we found that there's overlap. If you think of a Venn diagram, there are those who are best on that side and those who are best on that side, and some people who are pretty good doing either. So we actually worked with Dell, reassigning people. Their whole task was how do they account for 100% of somebody's time. So people would be time sliced. 20%, 5 projects. Doesn't work. So we actually got in a room and did a big board of all the people on all the projects, at least this was early on, and said, okay, how can we reassign people so that they're on no more than 2 projects, if at all possible, 1. And it took time, it took almost a whole year, and we got it down so that the average was around 2 for certain roles. Some roles who are very specialized and very valuable to us, like architects, they had more split time. It's hard to assign an architect full-time to a project. This doesn't happen very well. So we went through that kind of thing. So we lost people along that way, and we lost some people who were, in fact, executive product owner, who never could get the idea of Agile. It was so waterfall, so plan-driven. Drove herself nuts along with a lot of us, and it was just very, very hard to make that conversion. There's a certain degree of freedom, and you have to be able to live with the anxiety of having that freedom and flexibility that you don't have under a plan-driven, structured approach, which some people feel very comfortable with. So different people work in different environments appropriately. And if you're big enough and have a big enough program, you make the adjustment. So I'd actually say, we only have maybe 25% of our teams are like 90% Agile practices, if you will. And probably 25% are still traditional waterfall, because what they're doing is just doing something that's very mechanical, very little creativity. They know all the steps, they know everything that has to be done, they know the schedule, estimation is easy, etc. Don't have to be Agile to do that, just executing. And then there's this big group in between who have a hybrid approach of lots of Agile practices, but not all Agile practices. And so we have this big middle group of hybrid, and 25%, maybe 30%, if you will, pure Agile Scrum. And that's been changing, and we're trying to get more people more Agile. At one point in 2000, we did surveys in 2009 and 2010, and found, using actually Nokia's survey that they had published some time previously, and we modified that with the help of our deputy CTO, who is our Agile protagonist for everything. And, you know, we got to a point where we had 80% of the teams being 75% or more compliant with all the Agile practices in the questionnaire. That was like our high point. Because there's no such thing as 100%. What are all the different things you're going to count or not count as being, quote unquote, fully Agile, or fully Scrum, or fully Common, or whatever, right? So we thought that was a pretty good, and now we're trying to re-emphasize with all the turnover we've had, we're trying to re-agilize ourselves and bring ourselves back up to that kind of level, because we did drift off.
Yeah, actually, we've had a very different experience. We haven't lost people on their own accord because we implemented Scrum. We've got a couple people that we really had to coach very carefully in terms of how has it changed their job as a business analyst, right? Maybe there's more communication, there's more openness, there's daily stand-ups, there's being available and providing input. But we've actually found it to be a very good recruiting tool. You'd be surprised you put the word Agile in your job description and suddenly you get a whole other set of candidates that you might not have normally found. And from a corporate IT perspective, we're on a much smaller scale, so it's probably why we don't have this similar experience with the other folks here. But it does, bring out people that are more creative, that are more interested in being innovative as opposed to just being, taking orders and creating product. What we try to do is use that Agile framework as a means to build that team that really is collaborative, right? In our environment, that seems to be something that's very important in what we do.
Bruce, there's 2 questions.
Okay, we can finish this one up. We'll go back.
One thing that in a previous organization when I worked, what we did from the beginning, we actually put a lot of emphasis on how architects and functions that had more of a governance role in previous methodologies can fit into Agile. And as we started adapting Agile and also transforming the organization, we are actually organized functionally. And what I did, one role that I didn't see brings value in that structure anymore was actually my role. I was Vice President of Quality Assurance. So I became Scrum of Scrums with a coaching and advisory function around quality and testing in Scrum teams, Agile testing, exploratory testing, while I was actually Scrum of Scrum. So having everybody understand that they still have a role in an Agile software development organization, they can bring value and they can also advance their skill set. I think that's something that will help retain people and expertise.
Yeah, just one, Agile, as I've seen it, it actually introduces a certain amount of transparency into the organization. We put up on big boards like what the development team or engineering team is working on. We post burn down charts. We invite people into our world and say, hey, come see what we're doing, right? And so that infects the culture of the company. And the people who opt out of that are those who like that transparency, who can't deal, with actually sharing that with the team, working collaboratively with others. And I think it's actually a positive influence on overall culture.
Questions? I think there was one here.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about something we heard this morning about consistency. Consistency in planning, artifacts, and events. And I imagine that larger firms have a greater need for consistency, alignment with architectural frameworks, strategies, etc., onboarding new hires. And my question for you all is, how are you promoting and sustaining consistency, even as individuals in your organizations experiment and innovate? And also, do you have an in-house methodology that your teams refer to?
It sounds like we got a couple of questions. Why don't we have one panelist answer and then a couple of comments, and then we'll move. Anyone want to field this one?
We've established what's called a Center of Excellence, which is a team of architects and others who consider how everything is being done from an architectural standpoint and the changes that people are intending to make. We're a service-oriented architecture now. We left the big box and went to service-oriented architecture, so virtually anything anybody does affects somebody else, and therefore we have to have some way of reviewing it and making sure that it's going to be consistent and not lead to unforeseen problems. Until we did that, we had lots of unforeseen problems. So that's been one of our keys to doing that. Another is what we call our Product Owner Forum, which is 90-some people. It's really the combination of a product owners group, Scrum, and the Scrum of Scrums. It's the two, the Scrum Masters and the product owners, where we review now twice a day, twice a week, and it used to be every single day, for 30 minutes, if you can believe it, across 40-some teams, what things were standing in their way and what anybody else could do to help them get around whatever was standing in their way. So we still do that, but we're done a week now, which is pretty good.
I would say, we say in our company, the only thing that's consistent is change. Right? So I think you need to think about Agile as always improving, always getting better. So we may have implemented a process 2 months ago or an artifact that no longer works, right? So don't think of it as sort of that's the artifact, that's what we're going to use, but think of it, how do we continuously get better at what we do?
I'll give the opportunity for a follow-up question. Did that answer the question, the previous questioners? Was there any follow-up to it?
Do you have an in-house methodology that people refer to? So there's a process in place for architecture or for the COE for product owners, or possibly you mentioned the artifact isn't the be-all and end-all and it should be adjusted. Is there a mechanism where people go to see what the current adjustments are and take advantage?
Yeah, so we've started sort of these communities of practice, right, in the company. So getting together product owners from across different product teams or Scrum Masters or UX people or QA resources, and just to learn from each other. Because there isn't a book that you can go to or that's going to say this is how it works for your company specifically. So we encourage the people to step outside of their daily lives in the Scrum teams and actually work with others like them who are solving the same or having the same problems.
Hi. When you had the shift from resisting to embracing Agile, whether it was key individuals or a piece of the culture, can you recall a moment that you knew that shift was occurring and what happened right before it?
Very profound story. I tell people this all the time. When I first joined Athena Health, Scrum was new to the IT organization. It was used within engineering. I think people heard buzzwords, so it wasn't completely foreign to them. But one of the things that I did very early on was just created a roadshow to go to all the different departments. Because now I'm sitting here in front of finance executives and HR executives and sales and marketing executives to talk to them about how we're going to do work. And I remember coming out of a presentation within the HR organization, and the payroll manager came up to me and said, "This is awesome." He says, "I'm going to run my team this way." And it's a very small team, but it was something that clicked with him. And I think having everybody in the room see that, with somebody is very, payroll, which is very different sometimes than writing software, right? And to see him have that type of effect on him was very rewarding to me, and it started to help me, again, being new to the organization, feeling as though we started to connect with people. And, I hope that everybody has stories like that, because it is really nice to see people within different walks of life really relate to Agile and what it means.
And when they stop referring to titles and start referring to roles is when you know you've got it, right? So when they stop talking about project coordinators and program managers and they're talking about product owners and Scrum Masters, you know you got it.
I would have loved to have had one moment where it was a big aha, everybody's on board. But I will admit that I've forgotten. We did, the CIO and I, she's also our senior VP of IT and operations, when we got invited to the Executive Leadership Committee, as it was called, to talk about this new Agile Scrum that we started in the IT division. And literally, they were all there and they said, "Well, this sounds wonderful. Now, how are you going to help everybody else in the company understand it?" And we devised a roadshow, and we went to every single department in every single geographical location, and I did half of them and she did the other half, where we explained what the process was like. And many business units ended up trying to adopt that and asking, in our case, the PMO for the coaching, since we run all the training and coaching programs. And that part has been terrific when that has happened. But unfortunately, there was no single aha moment. But that's probably the best one, to get invited to the Executive Leadership Committee and say, "Teach us, now teach everybody else."
One thing that, we've done pretty much every method that was mentioned here, but one thing that really resonated with our teams was the fact that we brought Agile coaches to work with our teams at location. And we actually have one in the room over here, David Grable, and he worked with our Boston team. Unfortunately, we had them only for about between 3 to 5 months. And then I've done a survey to see what people think about it. And was one thing that was rated the highest as far as moving forward into the Agile adoption and Agile transformation, bringing coaches on site so they can work with the teams day in, day out.
Just one quick thing on that. When I implemented, when I launched Log Me In, I implemented Scrum boards in our little product area. So the engineering team had their Scrum boards, but we wanted to set up some. And the point that I saw when I went around the office a couple months later and went to the sales side and saw that they were using Scrum boards and having conversations, sticky notes. At least I had that level of impact.
Excellent. Next question. Go ahead, Max.
Yes. Can you address some of the issues when you have some of the members of the Agile team remote as opposed to co-located? And specifically, I'm more interested when some of the members are remote, not when you have an entire team that's remote. Although that's interesting. Split teams.
Yeah, I can start with that. So we have all of our engineers in Budapest, as I mentioned before, and so the product team is actually located in Boston, which makes it really hard, right? Because product ownership needs to be co-located with the team on a daily basis. So to overcome that, we've tried a number of things. I wish I could say we've got it 100% right, but most recently we've done what's called two in a box. We pair it up and we do like pair programming. We do pair product management, where we pair up somebody from the engineering team, the dev lead, with a product person from Boston, and stick them in the box and say, okay, here are your, understand, make sure they have a clear understanding of the business metrics that we're trying to achieve with this particular feature or this story, and then have a clear understanding of the resources and concepts that we're going to use to implement that, estimations, etc. And they're co-responsible. I know the co-product owners are definitely a no-no when it comes to Agile, but in order to bridge that divide geographically, it seems to be working. So they have a real good sense for each other's responsibilities. It's sort of like left brain, right brain working together with each other. It's still a whole brain. And so that's the way we try to address it.
How do they actually work? How do they communicate and talk?
Communicate, so we said we have to have at least 2 interactions a week through conversation. And we've implemented desktop video conferencing as well, so there's a human element. It's really important.
We actually had team augmentation that was off in Manila when we were based in Acton. So not only do we have to worry about trying to keep remote team members coordinated, but we had to worry about time differences as well too. So it was a matter of figuring out what's the right time to have a daily stand-up, and then really trying to get them involved as much as possible. So we used a lot of video conferencing, whether it was our own Polycom system or whether it was Skype or whatever, to really keep them actively involved on a regular basis in terms of what was going on. It's very difficult. My preference is with offshoring to try to give them complete products and have them run as their own individual Scrum team, as opposed to doing staff augmentation, because it just makes the coordination and the teamwork a lot harder. It can be done, but it's not as efficient.
We've done essentially the same thing, and initially there were quite a few split teams between India and here, for example, and that's just too big a challenge from the time zone difference and everything like that. So eventually we evolved to a similar model where the India teams have their own backlogs, and they're part of the backlog of a whole product work stream. So they're one of several teams building into the same work stream. And that has worked out pretty well, I think, at this point. And then we have people rotate back here, from India to the States to work on teams here, so they get to meet and know everybody here, insofar as visas and everything else can be worked out.
In addition to all these methods, another good thing that I've done in the past, and I'm actually ready to implement that with Trizetto, is having an Agile coach at the location, at your offshore location, that works closely with the Agile coaches here in the US. That helps bring consistency and keeps teams from different time zones focused on Agile, because it's very easy for the offshore team to start straying away and going back to what they know, which can be waterfall or an iterative development.
Take our next question.
Hi. We've had a lot of conversation around Scrum. I was curious about folks that have actually worked with Kanban and how planning works around Kanban, because that in itself could be a challenge where Kanban is typically a full process.
Planning around Kanban. Who's using Kanban?
So we end up using something more Scrum-like, Scrumban, right? A lot of our art is about Scrumban. We're using Kanban really to plan out the releases. So so if you think about having larger stories or epics that you're trying to deliver against, and then using more of Kanban at a higher level. The scrums and the sprints are much more on the smaller level, and then using Kanban to really move that work from planning to in-process to testing to done. And we also adopt the planning boards as well. I think, like Matt said, how it changes the culture by having those boards available to anybody on the teams, anybody in the building that comes by and sees it. And then just using it really, we're going through a phase right now, I think, where we're actually going to be moving more towards Kanban after having just gone through an intensive coaching session for the last 2 weeks around revisiting our processes. And a lot of what we found was that there was a push more towards Kanban, but wanting to take advantage of still some of the nice features within Scrum in terms of communication and planning.
And I think I mentioned that we use it as well in our release management process, but that's release management into the production environment as opposed to release for the teams, which have their own release schedules. But when they're ready to get it into the production environment, then they put it on the Kanban board that will move it across those different environments I talked about. Then there are a certain specific team, and that's very generic. Then there's like our test data management team that is very original type Kanban, in that they have a certain number of staff who can handle exactly so many data requests involving so many application areas that when they're assembling the test data, they have a real Kanban view. We can take this many things in this particular stage, and everyone else is waiting until it moves to the next stage, and then the next stage. So they're really moving just like the card and the stack of seats on the production line. That's exactly what they're doing in their request for test data management. So they've been pretty classical in that.
One thing with the pull method specifically that I've done in the past is very well used for Scrum teams that have a lot of technical debt to deal with. For example, they get a lot of severity 1 issues that they have to fix for customers. So what I've done, I work with the teams to estimate their capacity at between 40 and 60% based on the maturity of the team, and put in their backlog that we are going to do only this much for the new on the new release, the new features. And then, as they had time, they will go and pull from the backlog new user stories. So in the meantime, they had the capacity to deal with severity 1 issues that were coming during that sprint from hard clients and fixing that technical debt. It's challenging to actually sell this method to management and executives because there is not that trust that the team will go actually and pull more user stories from the backlog. And having that transparency and building the trust actually is instrumental before you can implement this method.
One more quick thing. Kanban works really well when you have tickets that are small and sort of similarly sized, right? So like QA is good. Fixing bugs, working on those. We found that to be an effective sort of use for Kanban. But I'd say beware the sort of the development manager who prefers Kanban to avoid sort of measuring velocity of his team, which I found to be the case. Whereas, hey, we don't have to measure. We're just using Kanban. The tickets are done when they're done. I said, yeah, but are you measuring how fast it takes to get a ticket through? And typically they are. So watch out for that.
I think this is going to be our last question here. Ben?
Well, that was actually a great segue to what I wanted to ask is measurement or metrics. What, if anything, have you found it useful to measure? And also, has anybody gotten to really a full-blown kind of an ROI analysis where you can say moving to Agile saved us X or improved value or some other final measurement you can show your top management?
I think that's a really interesting question because I have a really big metrics background. What happened in our early implementation is, in the first 3 years is that we gradually had all of the teams doing their velocities and their burn-down charts, and that was working very well. But even as they got good at it, they stopped doing it because it was just extra time. They simply already knew. They made stories. I know one team, for example, that was very consistently making stories that in their scale were 10 points apiece. And after a while, it's, why are you going through, they ask themselves, why are we going through all this estimation when every story we make is approximately 10 points of work? So why don't we stop that and do unit counts, which is what they switched to, which is fine, because they still had a velocity. In this case, it's number of stories completed per sprint. So as long as you have some measure, whatever the measure, of velocity gives you some idea of what's going to happen for the team. We find it's very, very difficult to get people to do it consistently and well. We've had ones that do it extremely well, and we try to get those people to teach the other people, and we have courses on it, just like we do on almost every other element, but it's very hard, unless you have a police state, and we don't. We might be a PMO, but unless you're going to have people going out and checking everybody's burn-down charts and velocity charts and stuff like that, if they don't find it particularly valuable, it will drop off. If they can still accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish in their backlog, by the end of that time period, they don't see the value of the activity. So somehow, it has to have that value, and then it will be self-sustaining. And that's what happens on the teams that do it well.
It's at the team level, but at the executive level, executives always have to report out the twins metrics of the evaluation and the ROI and your growth. It has to match your growth strategies. And even with executives I've worked with, that has been at the team level. There's a lot of different metrics you can play off of. But what has worked at the executive level?
Yeah, so I was going to actually answer that question that way, which is development is in service to the business, right? And so if you're not, business isn't improving, and your metrics aren't improving in your business, then actually doing the work, you shouldn't even bother doing the work. You wasted the time, right? This is where the lean philosophy comes in. So I say, focus on the business metrics. Are we in the SaaS business? Are we trying to improve our funnel optimization, from visitor to Verge to trial, et cetera? And if so, then that's the measure of success. And how quickly you can adapt to that is really what Agile helps you do.
Wow. So why don't we wrap up with one final, very short question. So I'm going to give you each a very magical Twitter account. And this Twitter account, in 144 characters or less, allows you to message yourself a year ago. What piece of advice or bit of information would you send yourself 1 year ago? Start with Matt.
Focus on the business objectives and on managing stakeholder involvement.
Excellent. Thank you. Paula.
The message I've sent myself, considering where I work today, would be start Agile transformation with the executive team.
Excellent. Chad.
The message I have would be, back to one of the questions earlier, is around consistency. Is being consistent across your Scrum teams or your Agile teams, ensuring buy-in and transparency.
And I guess mine would be that I need to continue providing more coaching for the product owners.
Steve? Yeah, I was going to say coaching.
However many times you can fit that into
It doesn't happen magically. It really doesn't.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our panel. We really appreciate it.
And thank you very much to Bruce for moderating and for all the great questions.